this Committee of the Whole meeting of the Town of Gibsons to order for January 23rd, 2024 at 3 p.m., 3:01 p.m. now, according to the digital clocks, and acknowledge that we're gathering on the traditional territories of the Squamish Nation. First, we need to approve the agenda. I can safely look over this way, but I guess I need to look at the screen too. Is Councillor Lumley with us?
Yes.
Okay. So moved by Councillor Cole, seconded by Councillor D'Andrade. All those in favor? The agenda is adopted, and first we have a delegation which is BDO Canada regarding our 2024 audit planning report. Cayenne, you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation for me to present our audit planning report. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? The report titled Audit Planning Report to Mayor and Council?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. So I will go over this report in high level. Many of you will have seen a version of this report in previous years. The purpose of this report is to highlight our scope of work with respect to the audited financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2023, as well as highlight areas of risk and focus for the audit. I will remind members here today that our report is interactive. So if you have a PDF copy of the report, you can click on the red buttons and it will bring you to other parts of the report or externally to our BDO website where there's more information and reading or further information for your perusal. So just a quick introduction to the members of our audit team who you'll be working with this year. So we have myself, my name is Cayenne Yu. I'm an audit partner in the BDO Vancouver office. And I've been working on this audit for quite a number of years now. I think this is perhaps my 7th year involved in the audit. So I'm very happy to be returning with you today. We have Marjorie Mercado, who is a audit senior manager, also in our Vancouver office, who will be working with Lorraine and the finance team to execute the audit. And we also have Darren Taylor, who is a tax partner located in the Vancouver office as well. He lives on Vancouver Island. He assists with any indirect tax matters, so that would be GST, PST, that the town. In terms of the audit timeline, I'm here today presenting our audit planning report. The next time that you'll hear from me is when we present our audit findings report, which is planned for April, where you'll hear the results of our audit procedures and any significant findings that we find. We will begin our audit field work in March, so a few months from now, and we already completed our interim and planning procedures, which happened late last year. With respect to the financial statements, I will remind members here today that our scope of work is over the December 31st year-end financial statements to ensure that the financial statements do present fairly based on public sector accounting standards. There is some information contained in our report with respect to our responsibilities over fraud. This is a point to remind users that we are not engaged to look for fraud. It's very difficult to uncover fraud as part of the financial statement audit due to the complexities that often occur when fraud is conducted within an organization, but it is an area that we are aware of during our audit. We're not currently aware of any instances of fraud impacting the town. However, if there are any matters that you would like to bring to my attention, my contact information is available earlier on in the report. Please feel free to contact me if there are any instances of fraud that you're aware of, or if there's any other matters that you'd like to speak with me directly about. In terms of the areas of focus for our audit, there's a few areas here listed in this report. It's not complete. We look at all material areas within the financial statement, a balance sheet and income statement, but there are some areas of particular interest that I'd like to go through with you today. And they are fairly consistent with areas that were presented last year. So the first item here is Canadian Audit Standards, CAS 315. You may remember a discussion last year about the revisions in international audit standards, which has filtered down to Canadian audit standards that requires more robust risk assessment procedures, as well as more testing over information technology or IS systems within an organization. This new standard was applicable to the town in the prior year. So this is just a reminder that the impacts of CAS 315 will have a continued impact to the audit going forward. Management override of internal controls. This is a mandatory area of focus that all auditors in Canada must examine as part of the audit. No matter how strong of a set of controls an organization may have, management is always in the special position to override these controls, and therefore we must, as auditors, pay special attention to this particular risk. To address this risk, we will look at things such as unique transactions, estimates prepared by management, and any unusual journal entries in the general ledger. Another area that we are required to look at as part of Canadian audit standards is revenue recognition. Accounting standards for revenue recognition for public sector organizations is quite complex. In addition to this risk of fraud that's mandatory under Canadian audit standards. However, based on our understanding of the different areas of or different revenue streams that the town has, our opinion is that this risk can be rebutted for fraudulent revenue recognition. In other words, there are no motivations or opportunities to have fraudulent revenue recognition, but this is an area that we continue to look at in detail because of the complexities in accounting standards. As I mentioned earlier, information systems, IS systems, is something we are paying more and more attention to, especially due to the revisions of CAS 315, and we will continue to look at the operating effectiveness of the MAIS system, as well as controls over online banking. Staff salaries, of course, this is the town's largest operating expenditure. We pay particular focus to the controls around payroll expenses, as well as performing substantive tests, such as looking at actual payroll checks and approval of timesheets and things like that. One thing that's new this year, although hopefully you'll remember some conversation in previous years about the new accounting standard, PSAS 3280, asset retirement obligation. So this is a new standard for all organizations reporting under public sector accounting standards for the current year. And it requires the town to report a liability in the instance where there is expected future expenditures to retire an asset. The most common example of an asset retirement obligation would relate to buildings with asbestos. Because there is a legal requirement to specifically deal with asbestos in buildings at the end of its useful life, a liability does need to be estimated and reported as a liability as of December 31st, 2023. Management has already been working on implementing this new complex accounting standard, and we will be working with management in the upcoming year-end field work to ensure amounts are reported appropriately. And lastly, another new accounting standard that's applicable to the town in the current year is financial instruments. The new accounting standard does create some additional requirements with respect to disclosure of financial instruments because the assets and liabilities of the town are not overly complex. We don't expect any accounting changes to existing financial instruments, but there will be additional disclosure in the notes to the financial statements, which you can read at your end. I'll just pause here before I move on to the next section of my report to see if there's any questions.
I don't see any. Sorry, I don't see any.
Excellent. With respect to materiality dictates the amount of work we perform in our audits, specifically in terms of sampling. We've planned materiality to be $398,000, which is calculated based on 3% of budgeted revenues. If actual revenues at year end are much different than budgeted revenues, we will adjust our materiality level accordingly, and this will be communicated at our year end presentation. This number, of course, seems quite high. We do look at items below this amount, and if there are any accounting errors above 5% of our materiality level, this will be, again, communicated to you in our year-end report. The remaining portions, remaining pages of the report is just further information if you're interested. So information about how we conduct our audit, our quality control processes, our technology equipment that we use, how we communicate with the town's management electronically, because we do perform the audit remotely, as well as some thought leadership that you can read in your own time. There's some particular information that you might find useful over sustainability as well as accessibility. And I will just bring your attention to Appendix B, which is our engagement letter, which management has already signed, but is here for your reference. So this brings me to the conclusion of the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? No, it's all there. This is a pretty basic process of reviewing what you can offer, and again, it's all very professional and thorough. So I think we're probably ready to. Oh, wrong agenda here. Yeah, is there a recommendation on this one? I mean, this is just the introduction to move forward. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for the report.
Thank you very much.
And next we have our Director of Finance. There's a number of reports this meeting related to preparing for our budget, and mostly all related to really our utilities. And so there's 7, I guess, different reports here related to that. And the first one is Sanitary Sewer Long-Term Financial Plan. We've got a presentation on this.
Good. Thank you, Mayor. All right. So I'm going to keep this pretty high level. This is a presentation that you're all familiar with, but I want to keep it a bit high level because I think much of the discussion is going to happen in the next session with the Director of Infrastructure and the presentation of the capital plans. We do have potentially Steve Brubaker on the call or on the meeting. He's from Urban Systems, and he's been working with the town on the strategic plan for the sanitary sewer program. And a lot of that information is informing the long-term plan, and he'll be available to help maybe provide some context if council has any questions there. All right, so the goal hasn't changed. We're still on track. We're still aiming for the same goal. The reserves are also no changes there. I still build in an operational reserve, a rate stabilization, and a capital reserve. What has changed is that although the annual increases that council has approved over the years we've been making improvements all the way along, the financial plan is under some really significant pressure, and that's due to changes from several factors. So the first one is a big one, and it's the escalating construction costs. And this is really, the economy hasn't really been the same since COVID. Everything has really escalated in cost, and the construction costs that we've seen for the last few years now are really settling in, and they're not going down. I had hoped that the long-term financial plan, I was seeing it coming, and I was waiting to decide. It's a long-term plan, it's 100 years, right? So I thought hopefully it could absorb it, and it just really can't in the short term. So that's impacting the plan from now on, I think. The other one is the aging infrastructure and the backlog that we have for replacement. So we do have assets that are still being in use, or they're still in active use, but they're past their useful lives that we estimated. That creates some risk. We do often, if we don't have the funding, we delay the replacement of those assets or the repair, and that does cause some issues. We are running out of some room in terms of opportunities to delay some of them because they're coming up and we can't use that lever anymore. And although we're building annual requirements, we're collecting money every year, we can't build up enough to kind of get ahead of the backlog because we need it every year as we go. Other issue is insufficient DCC charge funding available. This one we don't have a lot of control over when it comes to timing because it has to do with our DCCs that we collect, but they're development driven, and just the balances that we have on hand aren't sufficient enough to match the funding requirements that we have for projects that are coming up. And then the last one is debt requirements and the impact of debt servicing. So we don't have enough either money in our reserves or money in development cost charges for development-based projects, then we have to fund by debt. And so the requirements that we have over the 5-year plans that are being proposed are really significant. And so that's going to require some really close monitoring in terms of our debt capacity. And the town has historically used debt very strategically, which has been fantastic. And we're really going to have to keep doing that because the pressure is going to get quite tight on that if other areas of funding don't come up. So this is an example of the asset backlog. And so this is the asset retirement replacement schedule. It shows the replacement over several years. The target for capital reserves is 3% of the replacement. That balance is now that we're aiming for is now just under $3 million. It's basically double from what it was a few years ago. And so that's, really immense pressure on us being able to complete those projects. You'll see, so right now the backlog is $28 million. It used to be about 14. 27 million of that is sewer mains. So that is a bit of the big challenge we've got. And previously, we've had some room for delay, and we still do have that, but it's getting riskier the longer we go, basically. From this long-term financial update, I base the operations is based on the new preliminary budget for ops. And that evolves every year, but slight changes. Capital, the way I look at it is I get the updated 5-year plan from infrastructure, and then I gradually build in the annual cost for replacement. This is basically how much money we should be setting aside and spending every year. And our new 100-year average is $1.7 million. It's increased about $750,000 from before. Again, lots of pressure there. We still haven't, building in the backlog. That's just without even catching up on the backlog. The backlog I've built in the latter half of the plan. And not to say that we wouldn't do it then, but just building in the expenditures. So there is already delays built into the long-term plan. So it's just trying to adjust our risk level on how much tolerance we have for that. And the reason for me to, one might say, well, why aren't we building it right now? If I built all that in right now, the rates would have to go through the roof. And I don't even think we could get rates large enough to cover that. So what I do from a rate point of view is I'm trying to avoid shocks to the system. So we don't want to I don't want to give council surprises. So try and build it in gradually so we can plan ahead, which is what we've been doing with the 555s for all these years, right? So this is the graph you guys are really familiar with as well. So just to refresh your memory, the sort of big green mountains in the back, that's the capital expenditures. The blue at the bottom is operations. that sort of middle line looks like a light blue. That's the debt servicing, so the debt interest and principal costs. And then the vertical bars are revenue. And the large pink one that you see in the middle of that mountain, that's debt funding. So the significant debt funding that we're going to be seeing in the near future for the 5 years, if the 5-year plan goes as laid out. And so for 2024, the debt projects, there's 2 of them in sanitary sewer. One is the outfall replacement design, and the second is for collection system repairs. And the Director of Infrastructure will go through that detail in his presentation. It just shows, sort of big capital requirements over 5 years, and then you can see it slowly graduates out, and that's me sort of trying to phase in these additional costs. The good news is, back in the day, we had a hard time keeping above our operation reserve, and that's not a problem anymore. I hate to say that out loud, but that's been, we've taken care of that, which is great. It's really capital is the big kind of elephant in the room, and that's where a lot of pressure is coming from as well. So from a proposed rate increase point of view, and so I'm recommending a minimum 5%. And although I could have gone higher, what I grappled with this year was I don't want to give council something that was a huge diversion from what you've seen previously. I also want to, raise awareness in the community that, there's a change coming. Keeping in mind also that with sanitary sewer, it's going to be impacted by the potential changes to the accessory dwelling changes you guys want to make for the charges there. And so I'm saying minimum of 5% for 2024. If you want to go higher, I would not object to that. But I'm basing all the examples on the 5. Future increases ranging from 8 to 13. It's really going to depend on how any other funding we get. In this context, given the economic environment, not just here, but it's globally, this is going to take some really significant provincial and federal funding. And so if that funding comes in terms of grants, then this will take the pressure off of our debt. But we had to build in, here's what we're looking at if we don't get some other funding. The challenge we have is funding for regular routine replacement. That's not really grant worthy, where development type projects are. And then the DCC bylaws, another place that we have some light there because it is being in the process of being updated. So any increased charges there will translate into increased funding being collected. It is development driven though, so the timing isn't something we can plan out. So in this case, so what I'm doing, basically trying to avoid a shock for, surprise rate hike, recognizing other changes. From an individual point of view, the example of a 5% would be an increase of $37.06. So this is just the 5% for the sanitary sewer. Doesn't take into account any accessory dwelling changes that we're talking about later in the meeting. And this would be the minimum change for this year. So, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the consideration of wanting to avoid giving council surprises and the public surprises about a big rate hike. And yet, there is a big surprise here, really. I mean, it shouldn't be, it's higher than I thought anyway, the inflation. I mean, and I know, I appreciate the Director of Infrastructure Services for giving me the heads up on some of these numbers that have been coming to our staff about just these massive inflationary increases in costs. And I think we do need to do our best to get that communicated out there to the public, and this is why. I can see a lot of anger in our neighbors at the Sunshine Coast Regional District about rising utility rates, and there are extremely necessary and good reasons for these rates needing to be increased because the costs are not just our needs to keep pursuing asset management, which this is part of the plan as well, but this rise in costs is just astronomical. It's double. So I think starting with 5% is relatively gentle compared to what we may need to be doing here, but at the same time, we really do need to get the word out to people that these costs need to be covered, unfortunately. I'll look to council for any more questions. Councillor DeAndrade.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's just to have a better interpretation of the graphic on sanitary sewer long-term financial plan. When I see the numbers here,
Couple back there.
Yeah.
That one, yeah.
yes, when I see the numbers here, I see that 26 is the highest number, the highest expenses with 5 millions, but when I look at the graphic, it's 8 millions. Is it because I'm just trying to understand what I'm reading here and the green, right? I see that the red corresponds to the 5 millions, 5.8, but why the peak is higher? And then there's 11.5 new debt funding required, and I read everything, but I could not put everything together.
Director.
Thank you. I'd have to dig back on the peak of the 8, what all is in there. That also, the way the program works, it includes, this wouldn't be all of it, but it includes principal repayments because that's part of capital as opposed to ops, where in our budgets, it's in the ops side, principal repayments. Part of it also too is when I build in the, any debt, I'm adjusting it by a year because we get the debt this year, but the actual repayment happens the next year, so there's a bit of a timing moment. But for the 5 years, the information in the spreadsheet is in there. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. It's, I think, this is a reality that every municipality is facing. Like if you sit on some of the committees I sit on, which deal with elected from other communities right across the country, everyone's dealing with infrastructure that is failing. And it's, I think Mayor White hit it on the head. It's how we communicate this out. And I'm glad to see Bronwyn is in the room because it's going to be a big challenge, but I think people want to be able to turn on a tap and flush and know that there are not going to be problems. So the big thing is going to be communication because it's a reality that not just us, not just the town of Gibsons is faced with, is every community nationally. And I know provincially, governments are reaching out for infrastructure funding to the federal government. And I'm quite sure we're going to have our hands out everywhere we can put them to glean funding. But as the Director of Finance referenced, some of these projects don't even qualify for grant funding. So we have to get creative on how we look at some of these problems and can we invent new mousetraps to get funding.
Councillor Lumley.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just wondered, when you look at the numbers and you look at the amount of debt, like say on the 5 years, you're going to be potentially without grants. So obviously there's going to be grant money come in, but there's a bit of grant money explained on the. I just wondered if there's any discussion, and maybe this is better for the next meeting, but I mean, at what point do you maybe look at another option for the town, which might be like to upgrade the whole system, like with a new system? I know that's, but I just wonder if there's any type of program, federal, provincial, anything where, you can actually prove that, all we're doing is chasing, like throwing good money after bad. And in fact, what we need to do is like upgrade the whole process with like a new system. I don't know if that's a possibility or if we've ever looked at that, but I mean, if this is a 100-year plan, this is 5 years at, $15 million. I don't know. I mean, maybe amortizing a larger number over that period of time at a lower rate might be an option. I just don't know if it's been looked at or if, like, I'm talking about a new process, like entirely, not just fixing the old one. But anyway, that was a question I had.
So to clarify, I think you're talking about a new process and system for financing sanitary sewer rather than a new sanitary sewer system.
No, a new sanitary
Right.
sewer. Like, has
Okay.
that been looked at? Like, at some point, like an old system that you're constantly repairing, maybe there's a point on an axis where you just go, okay, like this makes no financial sense anymore. What we need to do is not fix it every year. It's what we need is a new system, and we get to amortize that and pay that over the next few, like 25 or 30 years. Maybe that makes more financial sense. I don't know if anybody's had looked at that.
Director of Infrastructure Services.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. It's an interesting question. I think there's two elements to specifically with the sanitary system to consider. And I think your question does, I think it does warrant some consideration for the treatment plant itself and the treatment process. As far as, Steve, who's on the call here with Urban Systems, may be able to speak to that at a high level. I think the challenge that we have kind of over the 100-year plan is all the linear assets. So all of the collection mains that are out in the street below the pavement that are anywhere from 10 to 80 years old, which there's not really any way to avoid the depreciation of those assets and the need to replace those. So I think that the idea of looking at a new process makes sense kind of within the fence of the treatment plant. But to look at, like, there's not, like, you know, we have a collection system that spans the entirety of the town and it's at various ages of decay, if you will. And there's not really any way around the logistical challenge of getting, you know, wastewater from somebody's house to one centralized location. So I'll look to Steve if he has any thoughts on the kind of that big picture look about revisiting the whole treatment process. And that may be something that would be contained within the preliminary design of the expansion of the treatment plant, which is one of the items that we have identified in 2024.
Yeah,
Steve?
thanks. Through the mayor, I think that definitely something that could be looked at as part of the treatment plant. I would say that actually you're very fortunate in that a lot of your system is actually doing very well. So you're dealing with very little capacity issues within the collection system. You're dealing with obviously aging infrastructure. And the benefit of the renewal investment is you're actually restoring it back to new condition for those mains. So it's just being done on an incremental basis. So it's not band-aiding the system, it's actually like fixing segments. It's just that you're doing it in a stepwise fashion so that you don't have an even bigger spike. And I think even within the plant, the idea is to add new processes within the plant, but still to utilize what you've invested in to the greatest extent possible. Because if you throw all that stuff out with, say, 20 years of residual life left, it's money that then is also being thrown away. So trying to obviously use the stuff that you've got for the life that it has, and then try to do this in an incremental way so that you're sort of spreading it out. I mean, for the size of your community, it's pretty amazing. I was saying this to to Trevor and to Lorraine, that you're in a very enviable position that you can actually afford to deal with all of your issues without sort of putting a moratorium on growth. There are a number of communities with this inflationary pressure that we're facing that are honestly having to contemplate that. And I know the province doesn't like to hear that with all the housing targets, but you guys have done a very good job of managing your finances to the point where, I mean, you're able to handle this shock, this inflationary shock, without running into big troubles. I know it's painful, so it's not easy, but that's all because of the good, prudent financial decisions that you've made over the last 10 years. That's put you in this position. So it's an enviable position, I think, that the town is in, as much as it's hard news to hear probably right now. So.
Councillor Thompson.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Does this 5% increase have an effect or reduce the 8 to 13% range that we're talking about in the future years? I'm looking ahead in the forecast at the figure totals for 2025, 26, 27, and 28. I'm not suggesting that we jump to 6%, but I'm just trying to get an understanding of just what effect this 5% will have on that potential 5 to 13%.
I think they're directly related. The 5% that we have this year means that we're needing 8 to 15 or 8 to 13 in future years. I mean, we could go 13 now, and then maybe we'd have less in future years, but that's a different way of doing it. Now, let's see, I'll look to our director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the 5%, so the future ones, the future rate increases of 8 to 13, those are really just sort of holding our head above water in terms of, so the new debt we get is going to trigger debt servicing. And those 8 to 13 is the original 5-year plan of 5 per year plus a debt servicing on top. And so ideally, those are even higher than the 8 to 13. And for the, and so I was talking to the mayor earlier and said, basically, I'm suggesting a minimum of 5. And again, like I said earlier, if you guys want to go higher, that would be great. It all chips away at it, but it won't really impact the if we did say, so I'm trying to just think your question I'm thinking about as I'm talking. So if you did say,
Councillor Lumley, your mic is still on, just to let you know.
say you did do 10% this year, it doesn't mean that next year is going to be then 2. It just really means you're getting a bit more ahead of the game. Those 8 to 13s are going to be triggered by debt regardless, and they're going to have to be in there. So it just, it helps, but it won't make a significant dent later down the road. It just helps. It's more proactive than it would be otherwise.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the next report, which is directly related, which is the actual capital projects related to this plan. The Director of Infrastructure Services.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a spreadsheet that I think we'll bring up. Thank you. I will zoom in. Let me know when you can actually read this. And also just thinking for the councilors who are remote, if you could just chime up and let us know if this is going to be close enough to legible. Hearing nothing, I'm going to assume that means everybody can read it. So I think the report kind of covers, and the Director of Finance has already touched on a lot of the background into this. So effectively, the 5-year capital plan for the sanitary system is largely based on the strategic plan for the strategic master plan for the sanitary system, which Urban Systems, led by Steve on the call, has prepared for us and presented in draft to staff. As I would be expected for undertaking a project such as a major master plan, we're going to get a really clear picture on kind of the next 20 years of work that is required for the system. So that includes just some of the kind of fundamental asset replacement and upgrading work, as well as looking ahead to growth and the impacts that growth will have on the treatment plant and the process itself. And so there's a number of items which are in here that are proposed to be initiated in 2024, which would put us in a position where we would be able to upgrade assets as required once growth hits the point where we're going to be running into capacity issues. So the intention of this is to think strategically based on the master plan and look ahead to when we think these growth triggers are going to require an expansion of, say, the headworks. Aside from that, there's a few other new projects which are included in here, which are more operationally identified maintenance upgrades, such as the manhole repairs on the Bluff trunk main, and Sorry, there's one other one here I wanted to highlight. And the upgrades to the round building, so renovation at the wastewater treatment plant. Currently, all of the kind of administrative work at the treatment plant is contained within one building. So that includes all of the lab analysis, as well as the office space for the operators and their lunchroom. So that's lab work, and that's samples of raw effluent coming into the building, being, sampled and analyzed in the same building that people are on their lunch break. So for health and safety and sanitary reasons, there's a recommendation that we renovate an existing building that's currently being underutilized at the plant to turn that into the, if you will, the dirty building. So that would be where the change rooms would be, locker rooms, and the lab. And then the administrative building is a clean building. And so that would keep all of the potential cross-contamination issues out of that admin building. Aside from that, again, all of the work that's identified here is really coming out of the sanitary master plan, which I can speak to, and depending on the questions, Steve is also available on the call to speak to that. So with that, I'll look to Mayor and Council for any questions.
Any questions? Okay, I can see one councillor on Zoom. Councillor DeAndrade.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm curious if the upgrade of the waste facility will include like a new technology that would be able to remove microplastic and even endocrine disruptors, if there's anything on the radar in this regard.
Through you, Mayor, I would defer to Steve with Urban Systems to speak to that particularly.
Yeah, through the mayor, something that could be looked at during pre-design. At this point in time, the focus has been on maintaining the effluent quality targets that are in the permit. I mean, those are definitely contaminants of concern, and these treatment technologies have varying effectiveness at removing those things, but that's definitely something that could be reviewed in further detail during the preliminary design as technologies are considered. Yeah.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. I'm circling back sort of with respect to what Councillor D'Andretti just raised, but when one's looking for funding opportunities, might there be opportunities if you were sort of looking to improve the discharge of your effluent in so much as capturing microplastics and pharmaceuticals? Might that open venues for grant funding as opposed to just replacing a status quo piece of equipment?
Director. Through you, Mr. Mayor. In my experience, 5 to 10 years ago, there was a lot of grant funding that was out there for kind of clean water and wastewater related projects. I don't know, from my recollection, they were focused more on kind of the typical markers of wastewater quality, which would be like BOD, so oxygen demand and suspended solids within the effluent. So those are the kind of the indicators that our permits would require us to. I'm not familiar with any specific grant funding that would be looking at some of the more, I guess, some of the more modern realized contaminants, so being the microplastics and some of the kind of things that are related to pharmaceuticals lingering as well in the wastewater. Again, Steve may be aware of some grant funding, but again, that was the water quality ones were more, 5-10 years ago. It seems to be now there's a lot more of the grant opportunities that are kind of looking more towards like resiliency and climate change. I also think that with the housing changes as far as legislation from the province, I would hope that there's going to be some grant funding that's going to be looking at increasing capacity, infrastructure servicing capacity to facilitate that growth. And that a lot of the work in this 5-year plan, capital plan specifically for the sanitary 5-year plan, a lot of that work is proactive, looking at growth of the town and putting us in a position to be able to treat that effluent as it happens. So uncertain about the wastewater quality grant funding opportunities, but certainly would be optimistic that there will be grant opportunities that are related to expansion of capacity.
Just looking to see anyone on Zoom. Councillor DeAndrade.
Yeah, I just want to remind that the fact that we are in a biosphere reserve, so this is a good reason to include this in grant applications, right? And biodiversity here in Howe Sound has increased exponentially, I would say, in the last years as a result of having a cleaner environment, and all this endocrine disruptors, they impact mammals. Actually, they impact everybody, even fish, as well as microplastic, right? There's tons of microplastic found in fish now. So anyway, it's just not to forget that, use this as, and I'll look at as well in maybe conversation in the biosphere reserve Howe Sound. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big concern. Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, just on the actual, on the idea, I think I'd like to, like my first blush is to stick with just the 5%, which has been offered here for the taxpayers. I think if I had my druthers, and if you look at the sanitary projects budget, I mean, it goes up and then it comes back down. I don't know, if I was a person, I'd like to say, here's an increase in this year, because it's easier to explain when you're saying the next year you're replacing the Prowse Road force main and it's $2 million. That's easy to explain to taxpayers rather than saying, hey, listen, we're going to increase your sewer budget because there's things coming in the future that we're going to have to pay for. I think I'd rather have it go year by year, because people are struggling with other things too. It's like, it's not just the town or the taxes or the fees. There's other things that are affecting people. And I think if you're going to substantiate or try and explain something, it's easy to do it on a year by year basis. And at that same point, you just talked about, possible grant funding and stuff. We don't know what's coming in the future. So I think I'd just like to stick with what we got going on right now. That's just first blush, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Lumley. Let's go to 4.3 because that's still a discussion of the same. So this is the preliminary operations budget for sanitary sewer, and coming out of that, we'll come up with our recommendation of moving forward as Councillor Lumley started that discussion. Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so the preliminary sewer ops budget, so there's two parts to this one. There's the annual rate review, which we've been talking about so far. And then the second part is that consideration of the adjustment for accessory dwellings. And so I'll start with the annual rate review. And so the revenue that we're projecting is just over almost $2.5 million for 2024, and that's an increase of about 200 grand from last year. As you're aware, there's two components to the tax and user rate revenue. There's new users created, so we had 11 subdivisions created last year, which helped added 11 parcel taxes to the our revenue. Then also the rate increase, and this is where the 5% comes in. And I mentioned that the 5% is a minimum. And if the capital plan is approved for 2024, the debt pieces, that will then influence next year's rate increase unless the alternative is if for some reason you approved the debt this year but didn't approve a higher increase next year, then that debt servicing eats into what's available for operations, and then what in turn actually is more available for capital. So it's a bit of a vicious circle there. This year also includes a transfer from reserves. So we're transferring $210,000 from reserves, $50,000 for flushing, $35,000 for some repairs identified in the cross connection control. And we also transfer $125,000, almost $126,000, and that's a debt servicing for Prowse Road. So we do have a bylaw in place. So this is part of our strategic debt use. So we have a bylaw in place that basically collects revenue from fees from developers to help fund the developer portion of the Prowse Road lift station. And so we're funding the Prowse Road debt through the funds that we've collected. And so far we have the funds on hand that we can cover that debt servicing, which is great. Expenses, just over $2.1 million, increase of just about $67,000. There are reductions in sewer collection, and that's just really transferring resources from collection more over to treatment plant. In the treatment plant, we've got some repairs and maintenance, which relate to the a diffuser replacement in the SBR. And then there's also some security upgrades that we're proposing for that site. It's a really important site, and we want to make sure we have our security up to speed on that one. We're also having to pay contractor costs because we're still in recruiting for the chief operator position there. And so our, recruiting challenges are impacting our operations, so we have to consult out to get additional resourcing there. The staff did an amazing job, and they did some process and chemical changes when it came to the sludge disposal. And so we had savings in sludge disposal costs. They were offset by, they basically covered the inflationary costs. So we came out kind of even, but it was great to see those changes be put in place by the staff there. So overall, the revenue 5% will drive a net operating surplus of about $342,000. So that's the money that goes into capital to help fund the capital program. So that's the rate side of things. And I'll stop there before I go into the accessory dwelling bit.
Questions on that side, the rate side of things? By council? No, okay, Councillor D'Andrade.
Just a clarification, Mayor, I remember during the update of Zone 3, all the work, this was going to be paid already through regular taxes, right?
That's water, that'll be later in the meeting.
Of course.
You're ahead of me.
Don't mix up water and sewer.
This is a similar thing in a way that comes, but.
Let's move on to the accessory dwelling piece.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And so the accessory dwelling piece, so this is a potential change to help council support the housing strategy. And I brought you a report in December about here's some options of basically removing a disincentive for accessory dwellings by removing the additional charges for sanitary sewer. And so this would apply, the resolution that was recommendation was passed for consideration is one minimum charge per residential property, but also continue to charge the Stream 2 RGAs for their sanitary sewer. So I crunched those numbers and took in, I had updated numbers for costs and revenue for this year. And so if option one is if council did want to implement that change, so you have the 5% is the change would be just 3706 that I showed in our previous slide. The accessory dwelling piece is an additional $30.49, and that's an estimate of who would drop off, who would, no, in this case, no, this is sanitary, so not dropping on, not coming back on, but it would be about new users, estimating development coming along. And so with the option of making that adjustment for the accessory dwellings, the total annual increase would be $67.55. That's for a residential property. And then option two is just applying the 5%, and that would be $37. So basically a difference of about $30. And the accessory dwelling adjustment would not apply to commercial properties. That would only apply to residential. So we'd have a bit of a mixed increase. I didn't do percentages there because it's 5% for everybody, but if you have the RGA adjustment, then it's more for residential only. So I thought the numbers were easier to communicate that.
Okay. Now, Councillor Lumley's spoken to the 5% piece of this. Ultimately, we could probably help staff by providing some recommendations around a percentage of increase, and also whether we want to proceed with these accessory dwelling charges that we ask to be prepared by our director. So we'll open that for discussion right now, and there's a question specific to that part of it from Councillor D'Andrade.
Thank you. It's just related to the subject the director was talking about. One of the same resolution also included the implementation of the longer-term volumetric-based sanitary sewer rate structure, and this should be incorporated. So my question is just operational, or will be capital as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So that would be mainly operational. So that one, so the volumetric one, and that's one of the other reasons I was wanting to, well, that I recommended, I'm more comfortable with the 5% because there's a lot of shifting around from that perspective. So the volumetric component to change the rate structure from that perspective, it's tied to, we need some software programming to help us change the way we bill. So basically the administration that way. It is also tied to, so we would need some help with the rate structure. And so that would be working with the consultants in Waterworth. So there'd be some consulting costs there. Not too much, so I don't think. The other tie, though, in is operational in terms of the infrastructure department. They read the meters, and the timing of that right now is quarterly, and then we bill every 6 months. If there was a potential change of changing that meter reading frequency, then that would impact the rate structure. And so there's a bit of a chicken and egg. So how long can we wait for potential changes there, if there's going to be improvements there, versus putting that in place? So it is in place. It would be a couple years down the road. It wouldn't be a huge bump from a capital line. We'd build it into ops in terms of a bit of higher professional services and sanitary.
Thank you. So I do have some recommendations that our director has some options anyway. And then one is that staff be prepared to prepare bylaws, or staff be directed to prepare bylaws that reflect a 5% increase to the current sanitary sewer parcel tax, and that the user fees be increased to include the accessory dwelling charges as outlined in R 2023-251, which was the motion we passed earlier. So that's, Councillor Lumley, are you moving that? Or, yeah, so that's moved by Councillor Lumley, seconded by Councillor DeAndrade, I saw first. Yeah, and then I think the option 2 that you sent me is a different path, right?
The ops.
Yeah, that's just the one, yeah, okay. So is there any discussion of this motion? All those in favor of the motion? The motion carries. Director of Infrastructure Services.
Just for clarification, and this may be necessary for the corporate officer as well, there were recommendations in the report under, I think it was 4.2, regarding the capital plan. So if I can take projecting based on your motion there, but I believe we probably would need clarity on the recommendations for the capital plan, which is that they be integrated into the 2024.
Could you give us a page number, please?
Oh, for sure. It's 57. Thank you.
57, okay. Right. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, with the,
Again, sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just looking for confirmation that the recommendations within that report are being carried as written, which is that the 5-year capital plans for sanitary sewer be integrated into the 2024-2028 financial plan.
yeah, I think that should be a separate motion.
Yeah,
Correct?
okay.
Yeah, so that's moved by Councillor Kroll. Is there a seconder? Councillor Thompson. Any discussion of this motion? All those in favor? That motion carries. Thank you for flagging that. So now I think we're ready for water. Yeah. Okay. We've got the Director of Finance is presenting on the water long-term financial plan to start things off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, all right. So this one is a bit repetitive because they're very similar. Well, it's the same approach than that's sanitary sewer. Both long-term financial plans, we have the same goal, and both long-term financial plans are under the same. They're under the same pressure. So I kept no changes to the reserve targets and no changes to the goal. The pressures are identical, and just from a sort of a large point of view, the aging infrastructure backlog is different numbers, but, and different, obviously, infrastructure, but same idea. The pressure of not having enough DCCs, same, and then, of course, the cascading impacts on the debt servicing as well. And again, different numbers, but same theory and same pressure. So the long-term financial plan, the asset replacement schedule for water, so this one went from, previously the value was 5.6, and then due to changes in construction costs, we're now at 12 million for water. The reserve for capital, or for water, is about 2.25 million. And of that 12 million backlog, again, 11 million is water main. So it's really underground infrastructure that we're challenged with. And previously, again, we postponed or tried to put off as we could, or fund with grant, or do with debt. And again, with water, and so this is where Councilor Giandratti brought up before, we did really strategic use of debt when it came to water. We had the Zone 3 expansion. The costs that we saved by council by approving that $3.3 million in debt was that we no longer have to purchase water from the regional district. And back in the day, that was close to $300,000 a year. And considering that their rate changes, we'd be impacted by that right now. So that was an incredibly astute and really great move that council made. That debt is going to be locked in this fall, is the earliest I can lock it in, because the project just finished. And their estimated servicing is about 220 grand, and that's going to be fixed, right? And 10 years it'll come up again for rates. But so that was really strategic use of debt, and that's what we're going to have to really focus on going forward because of the pressure on the plan. And so operations, same idea, preliminary budget. For operations, the five-year plan, I embedded the next 5 years in there as projected, and then onward. So here, the annual cost for renewal is 1.2 million, and that's increased from 820. So not quite as different, but still lots of pressure there. And I'm also trying to build in that backlog. And so this is the graph for water, and the spikes here are, so the 2024 to 2028 capital projects, that sort of big mountain there. The big one there for 2024 is the water, Skyline water main replacement, and the Director of Infrastructure can speak to that when he presents. Again, in this case, we're still above the operations target, which is amazing, because way back in the day, that was a problem. So that's been really great. Progress. And then again, the pressure really is about the backlog and the construction costs, and just trying to get ahead of those repairs and replacements, more replacements, and then also just trying to build up reserves. We can't build them up fast enough because we're spending them as fast as we collect them. And again, it's just really, really significant dollars that are challenging to cover from a rate point of view. And so again, with this one, same idea. I tried same logic, the 5%, knowing other pressures, knowing that the accessory dwelling potential impact there. In this case, future increases are anticipated to be between the 10 to 12% range. And again, that's probably pretty modest considering how things keep going. But again, this is partly as an opportunity to inform council and the community that there's a lot of pressure here. Same idea, hopefully we'll have some, amazing provincial and federal grant funding. The grant programs have been incredible lately, but again, as the Director of Infrastructure pointed out, it's more about housing and growth. It's not so much about water main replacement, which is unfortunate. I wish there was a grant for that, although it would be incredibly in demand. And then here, the DCC bylaw adds some light as well, because that's going to be updated, so that's good. And so for water, the sample property I pick is a property that uses 320 cubic meters a year, and the impact would be just over almost $48 per year. And people can tell where they are in relation to that based on their utility bill. Will show how much consumption they use. That'll give them a sense of, are they going to be above or below that number? And the 320 cubic meters per year is on the high side, so most people will be below this from a residential point of view, but you can tell on the individual bills. And I mentioned again, the 5% is a minimum really, but in the context of everything else, so. That's it, sorry, yeah. Thank you.
I just want to touch on that grant conversation, and I think maybe the Director of Infrastructure Services could clarify here. I do believe, there was a significant Growing Communities Fund grant that came out. Unfortunately, it was one time, totally based on a surplus that the provincial government had. But there has been calls from local governments to continue that in some way because it's a good program because of the flexibility of it, right? Like that is one that we could spend on water mains or replacement, where we are spending it on the centrifuge replacement, correct, at the wastewater treatment plant. So I just want to highlight that grant program as one that maybe we should target in our advocacy of one that is the kind of program we need every year, correct?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Growing Communities Fund, kind of baked into the name, is looking at growth. So the way that worked with the sanitary system is that the centrifuge will also have a capacity element to it as well. So that's kind of how it fits into that grant program, where some of these projects that are in the water 5-year capital plan are a little bit more just kind of focused on critical asset replacement. And so that gets to be, if the grant funding has language in it that's specifically tied to adapting to growth, and it may be a little bit harder to fit some of this in, although there may be situations where we can point to, for example, I'm just trying to think about some of these mains in here, maybe the water main on Reed Road. Maybe those properties could increase density, and there may be an opportunity to say that the water main also does need to be upsized to meet that density. So we might be able to kind of kill two birds with one stone, if you're part of the crude expression, where we might be able to increase capacity and also replace a failing asset or aging asset.
Maybe we could blame all the, the growth of the past 50 years on wearing these assets out.
I like it.
We already supported growth with these assets, now we need to replace them. Otherwise, they'd be in perfect shape. So this one's a little more straightforward, I think, because there's we don't have the piece about the accessory dwellings. We've already got metering here. I see a question from Councillor Lumley, and then we'll move on to the capital plan. Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, if I could just maybe, I don't know, sometimes, yeah, of course, the grant funding is amazing because, you're providing your whole community with clean water. But the DCC piece is also a question for me. So the fact that if you're encouraging growth, and this growth is going to take on these expenses of water and sewer and all these constant, like you're saying, these are constant draws on the assets of the town. I just don't, I'm not quite sure why the DCC funding is so little for this, I just don't, I don't know where we are with the DCC, like the upgrades to the bylaw, but I mean, I would hope that they would be able to help out in the long run with this review as far as our infrastructure for the town goes. I can't think about that.
That's definitely the plan. With this identification of the growing costs, we need to update our DCC's bylaws soon, and I know that's in the work plan. I'll look to our director to elaborate on that.
Thank you. Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the first or the last point there about the DCC bylaw and the timing from the last meeting that I had with the consultant working on the DCC bylaw. I believe all the projects that would be captured with that are identified and they've got their projections. And so I think at this point, we're probably, I would hope that maybe the end of Q1 or early Q2, I think that we would probably have something. And then there's a year, I guess, grace period before the new rates come into full effect for new development. And I think the reason we find ourselves at a bit of a deficit with the DCC funding that we have in order to replace the projects that are here, I would assume that some of it was probably related to maybe some slowdown of development through COVID. And then also just the inflationary increases that the Director of Finance alluded to earlier, where these DCC rates you'll have to forgive me, I don't recall exactly what year the current DCC bylaw was established, but it's a number of years ago. So inflation has escalated beyond what would have been anticipated when those DCC rates were set. So even if we were collecting DCCs at a rate that we were, as far as the rate of development that we were projecting, we'd still be probably finding ourselves at a bit of a deficit funding wise, just because of inflation has exceeded what the DCC rate projected.
I believe the last council actually did update, and the council before that did as well. So it's been, I think, compared to a lot of, maybe Steve could elaborate on this if he's still with us, but I think compared to a lot of local governments, we actually update ours pretty regularly, and yet still, because of this massive inflation, we find ourselves falling behind. I do wonder, though, if there are, I mean, considering, I don't think we clearly didn't anticipate this inflation, and I wonder if there's we should go into the next update looking at maybe a different way of like integrating inflationary measures into, if there's a way to do that. So I'll just ask our director.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Our intention will be, as this new DCC bylaw is presented, that we look at annual increases of the DCC rates. So the project list would stay the same, so it wouldn't be a full kind of rehaul of the DCC bylaw, but just an annual amendment of the DCC rates contained with that, so that we are keeping up with inflation. So that will be part of the presentation of the update of the bylaw when that gets brought forward. And I think Steve has left the call, unfortunately. He had a prior commitment, so.
Councillor Lumley.
Again, following up on that, what type of protection does, say a community like ours have with, say, like a gospel rock project, like where, I mean, I'm assuming when they applied for the permits and their applications, the DCCs were set at a rate. I don't know. I'm not probably as smart on this as I should be. But what happens? I guess we have no protection against that. So this development's been, somewhat delayed, I guess, and now costs have significantly increased since they've made their applications or were granted their permits. I guess we just don't have any protection as far as inflation or some of these costs that they get to pay for, but the town still has to put the work in and put all those resources in for that community.
Director of Infrastructure Services.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't believe that the Gospel Rock development has paid any DCCs to date. So generally, DCCs are collected at the time of a subdivision or building permit or development permit issuance. So for say a large commercial building, when they receive their development permit, one of the conditions of that permit would be paying the DCCs. So for that particular development they've gone through, they have their servicing agreement and the master plan and whatnot in place, but the actual building permits for some of the individual properties, until those are issued, that's the time at which the DCCs would be collected. So that does allow for DCCs to be collected for a large development that's going to take course over a number of years, of say a decade of build out. You are going to be collecting DCCs at the rates that are kind of appropriate as the development rolls out.
So good news there that we aren't locked into rates that were pre-inflation. Councillor DeAndrade.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if we can be even proactive in terms of inflation, because, I mean, many times we use just the inflation given the how do you call the index. This time, I think we're going to look at the actual cost, how much inflated, and can we add a little bit extra so we have 1 year leeway instead of, being always behind, because by the time we collect the DCC and go through implementation, there's already a 1 year sometimes. So just wondering.
Well, it can be hard to predict, but I'll look to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, we can certainly have our consultants look at that. There are, I think, some pretty specific requirements and restrictions around DCCs within the Local Government Act that may prohibit some of that speculative financing. I know that there are opportunities to roll some debt financing into your DCC, where if you have a DCC shortfall, you may be able to basically fund it through debt and kind of recover the cost through DCCs. So we have our consultants looking into that, Urban's looking into that, and I'll float that question as well as far as can we project on inflation, because it's certainly a good recommendation.
Councillor Kroll? No, okay.
I'm good. I was just thinking, I believe they are looking for a recommendation here as well. that we
No, not
support
yet.
the 5%
No, we actually haven't even made it through all the reports yet. So we need to look at the capital plan. Okay. Yeah, we'll look at the capital plan and deal with that recommendation first this time.
Thank you. Yes, we would be looking for the same recommendation as I brought up for the sanitary. So the water capital plan, I think we've kind of been talking around it here for the last little bit. I would say the only difference kind of substantially from the sanitary master plan is that a lot of the new projects that are here that are identified are more condition asset replacement as opposed to growth related. I think we have addressed our kind of future short-term, medium-term growth with the completion of the Well 6 project in Upper Gibsons. And so really this next 5 years, we're looking at replacing some assets which are at and beyond their kind of projected design life. So the big ones, I would say over the next 3 years that we have in here that we've identified would be replacement of water mains on Skyline Drive, which we have recommended for 2024, McCall Lane in 2025, and Reed Road in 2026. And that's the section of Reed Road between Park Road and North Road. And all of those water mains are asbestos cement, so they are prone to, when they do tend to fail, they tend to create a bit of a bigger mess than they would if it was, say, a PVC or a ductile iron water main, just the physical characteristics of the main. And the prioritization for those 3 projects was kind of established based on communication with our operators. We've had some leaks on Skyline Drive in the last Skyline, and then it's also lumped in with it our I believe it's Allison Way and Avalon. Yeah, the 2 side streets. And we had a leak up there a couple months ago. There was a pretty significant leak there in the fall of 2023. And that's why that one has been brought forward first. The fire department has also identified that one would be the most difficult for them to work around if there were a massive failure out there and they need to be responding to an event. So that's the reason for that being the priority. And baked in with that cost is so it's the replacement of the water main. It's also restoration of the surface, and it would be about one lane worth of asphalt restoration. So if this project were to, is to carry forward, we will be, and it will be presented within the general capital budget that'll come forward later this winter. It's going to be a recommendation for some additional paving so that we would be replacing the full road width because it's in quite poor condition for the entire length of the replacement project. But just because of the funding streams, this right now is just the water main plus the kind of the excavation repair, and then the rest of it would come under the general finance. Aside from that, I think it's certainly on the low end of the dollar value, but it's the one that I think that I would say that staff, we have the least amount of certainty as far as what we're looking to do with it, is just the Well 1 vending machine replacement, which has been on the books since before I started. And I think at this point, we're looking for a bit of direction on what Mayor and Council would like to see with that particular asset, because it has been out of commission, I believe, since 2020. So it'd be nice to, and that doesn't have to be we don't need a decision on that specific one today, but the money's there. That's an indicator of, there's quite a wide range of what we could do there. And so we've got some money that's been recommended to, depending on what it is that council would like us to do there, should cover some of the costs to reinstate that vending machine. And I think at this point, I'll look to council for any questions or comments.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to consider and maybe get some public feedback on. Occasionally, I think it's asked, certainly maybe through tourists who are visiting too, especially where can they get some water? And sometimes I think it sometimes even shows on maps and things on the internet that they can there, and they get turned away. But I don't know. I don't have admittedly, even though I live near there, I don't have a good gauge on what the public interest is on using that. I know in the past when it was free, we'd get lineups of people from outside of the town of Gibsons. I saw people, families I knew from Pender Harbor, showing up there with pickup trucks and big water canisters to fill up. So having it, I think, getting it to be a paid machine was a good move, but unfortunately it kept failing, and we're now looking at a cost to replace it completely. But there are a number of exciting projects on here, so I don't want to distract everybody from just that one smaller one. I see Councillor DeAndrade.
Oh, I was just going to do the parallel with, the summers are getting hotter and drier. So I think, having available water, it's almost a safety thing in a way, right? So, and people who can pay, go there and pay. Maybe we can distribute less plastic water in town during hot season.
Any more questions or comments about the capital plan? Okay, we do have a, could you read out the wording, Director, and the recommendation?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Let's see if I can get this right. I realize I didn't separate it within the report, so I'm doing this off the cuff. But staff recommend that the 5-year capital plan for water be integrated into the 2024 to 2028 water financial plan as presented. Our financial plan.
Oh, did we get the wording right?
Financial plan, not water financial plan.
Okay. Moved by Director Kroll, seconded by Director DeAndrade. Oh, got the directors are over there. Yeah, moved by Councillor Kroll and seconded by Councillor DeAndrade. Any discussion of this motion? All those in favor? The motion carries. Director.
Thank you. The Director of Finance just reminded me that with this, so any of the debt-funded projects that were identified in both the water and the sanitary plan, we would be looking to bring back a report for February 23rd, requesting early approval of those funding, those specific projects, so that we could initiate the AAP process, similar to what happened with the centrifuge last year before we swooped, the Growing Communities Fund swooped in and saved that process.
Okay.
Okay.
Good to know. And we have the preliminary operations budget for water. That's the final piece for the water section. Director of Finance.
Thank you, Mayor. And so this one is structured very similar to the sanitary sewer operation. So again, I based on a 5% minimum, noting that higher increases are going to be for our forecast for future years. So their revenue almost 2.3 million for 2024, and it's an overall increase of just over $105,000. Same impact on subdivisions from a parcel tax point of view. So 11 new parcels for water as well. So that'll be some increased revenue there. We're just talking about the water. The capital fund has Skyline Drive, which is a $2.185 million debt funded project. So that is going to be, if that goes through the process, that will trigger some additional debt servicing next year, which will trigger some additional higher rate increases to keep things level. From an expense side, expenses are budgeted to be just over 1.9 million. That's an increase of $187,000 from last year. There's a few pieces. There's the admin charge, and I review that every year to make sure that any of the general kind of operations, general activities, administrative activities that we do that service and support water and sewer are charged to the water and sewer funds accordingly. So that's an adjustment there. The aquifer monitoring, there, you'll see there's a bump in that one. There's a one-time increase to cover the costs associated with some geological model and data compilation, and then it goes back down to 35. So there's a bit of a bump this year, but it goes back down. The water governance, we maintain that in the operations budget just to in recognition of the importance of the regional water strategy. This year, because there is the Regional One water project, that's over in the capital budget. I dropped the ops budget to zero, but the funding is basically going to be moving over to the capital as a result. Distribution, we're finding some increases there, more staff associated with the distribution system within the water. And then also electricity is going to be increasing because now we have well 6 online, so that's going to be more electricity costs, as well as a new HVAC system at the school road pump house. And then we talked earlier about the fiscal, the $3.3 million for new debt. I'll be locking that in. The next opportunity is this fall. And right now, the prevailing rate, when I wrote the report, it was just over 4.12% for long term. And now it's down to about 3.99. So the good news is that the debt is slowly inching its way back down again. So that's really good. So I'm hoping that will be even a lower debt servicing than we anticipated. And so overall, again, this one, I'm recommending a minimum of 5% increase. And as noted in the financial plan slide, that would, for a sample residential property, that would be about $47.75. And it will adjust accordingly depending on how much water you use because there's a volumetric component to that. Thank you.
And that recommendation is worded as that staff be directed to prepare bylaws that reflect a 5% increase to the current water parcel tax and user fees. Moved by Councillor DeAndrade, seconded by Councillor Kroll. Is there a question, Councillor Thompson? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? That motion carries. And now to the final report on our utilities fees here and in planning, which is the Garbage and Organics Program rate increase report from our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so this is the last of our utility. This is a utility type report as well because we collect user fees for garbage. So that's why the timing comes at this meeting. And so every year I present the annual budget for on the program. And also in this case, I'm looking for direction from the committee about whether to incorporate that accessory dwelling change that you were considering earlier on this year, or just to adjust rates for inflationary impacts. And so the accessory dwelling change that is in for consideration is to adjust the user rate structure for the garbage and organic service to apply one minimum charge per residential property, regardless of the number of accessory dwelling units. And then anyone who wanted an additional service, so say they need 2 garbage cans, they would either buy a tag, or if they have more of a long-term situation, then they could approach us and we could add that fee onto their utility bill for convenience. And so I factored that in when I was looking at the rates. And so from a cost point of view, we do have inflationary costs in the garbage and collections service as well. The current contract is set to expire. It was a 5-year contract set to expire this February 28th. There was a provision in the contract for a 1-year extension. Town and the contractors worked together and we did agree on a 1-year extension. There was a 3.5% inflationary increase in there. So that's part of the new rate that's being proposed for today. And then the accessory dwelling, I adjusted for the billings to reflect just one minimum, estimated out maybe how many people would need more than one can, and also looked at new users. And so proposed to apply the one minimum is, so if council does want to make the adjustment for the accessory dwellings, the total increase would be $38 per year. 23 of that is inflationary impacts, 15 of that is the accessory dwelling adjustment. If council only wants to go just inflationary, a $23 increase would be required for this year, per year. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Questions on this, Councillor DeAndrade?
Yeah, I'm curious, why if the increase is 3.4, why if the inflation presented by the company that collects, it's 3.4, how come the increase is 10%?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the 3.5 is the inflationary part on their just collection. They also have embedded a fuel surcharge, and that's about 10%. And they embedded the fuel surcharge forget when that went in, 2022, when the fuel charges went just through the roof, they were over $2. And we are seeing a lot of this in other services that service providers are building in a fuel surcharge. So I reached out to the contractor and said, okay, I need some feedback on the fuel surcharge. Is this going to still be required? And they're seeing still the fuel surcharges are fluctuating too much. So they said, no, we have to keep it in. And so the 3.5 was really about the core contract. The fuel surcharge is on top of that. Yeah. And that's going to continue. But as soon as, I'm watching it like a hawk. And as soon as we can drop that off, I want to drop that off. But I had to build it in. Right?
So we have some control over that, and they're not just dictating because I see it fluctuating too. So
yeah, it's
just picking the high point of 1 year and saying that's what we need is not.
Yes, yeah. It's an interesting one because we have a 1-year extension, and so in a year, so worst case in a year, that is an opportunity to go, no more. And we have a really, really good relationship with this service provider, Salish Soils and AJM. And because of that, when they tell me they need that fuel surcharge in there, I'm okay with it. Just because our relationship is so good and they provide such an incredible service. But I did, are you sure? And they said yes.
Thanks. Councillor Lumley?
Yeah, once it's in there, it's gone. I don't know what kind of leverage we have because I don't know how many providers of organic pickup there are on the coast, but I was ready to move option 1. I know there's discussions of accessory buildings and stuff, and I can only assume, Mayor, that it's just housekeeping because you have to discuss it, but I don't understand why you wouldn't add that to it. So I'd like to move option 1 of the recommendations.
Okay, so I think that's, I've got a different option 1 in front of me. Corporate Officer?
I think I have the same one in front of me that you have. Lorraine, does the option 1 that you sent us capture option 1 that's in the report?
Okay, so I think that's, I'll just phrase it a different way and see if that works for you, Councillor Lumley.
Sure.
That staff be directed to amend the rates, fees, and charges bylaw 1196 to reflect 1 minimum charge per residential property as per R 2023-250, the same motion, or a different motion we referred to earlier, but it's same idea about the accessory dwellings. For garbage and organics collection and disposal services, as well as required inflationary increases for a total annual increase of $38 per user. Okay, that's what we're moving from Councillor Lumley and seconded by Councillor Kroll. Councillor Thompson?
I was seconding.
Okay. Too late for seconding and too early to vote.
Yep.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? That motion carries. Is that everything? Okay, we covered all 3 areas, and our Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. I notice our communication officer is back in the room, and I'm just wondering if we want to revisit any sort of public inquiry with respect to the well number 1, access to water?
I think we could probably, I mean, we have had a little bit of discussion about our, how our budget dialogue is going to work, going to look. I did suggest to our Director of Infrastructure Services and Director of Finance, and maybe we can look ahead to some of the possible capital projects that are going to be on the capital list. And I think it's a good idea to maybe put this project out there as well in that dialogue. Is that something that, I don't know how that, I think there might be some material in my inbox too about how that planning is looking. I don't know. But we've just been getting ready for this meeting, so I think that's possible. I think we are going to put some potential projects out to when we have our dialogue session. Which could I be reminded of what that date? February 7th. Is it's planned for February 7th? Yeah, so that's probably a good time. Councillor Kroll.
Okay, I was just in follow-up to that, then perhaps we create a bit of a shopping list of things that we could
Exactly.
put on that
Yeah,
list
that's what.
rather
Yeah.
than deal with them one-off.
Yeah. Yeah.
People can prioritize their wish list.
Yeah, I did suggest that on behalf of council to in an email to staff. So they're working on it. And our next committee of the whole meeting will be held on Tuesday, February 6th at 3 p.m. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor DeAndrade. All those in favor? Motion carries. So we'll see you at the public hearing at 6 o'clock. Thanks for joining us by Zoom.